Well, good evening and a very, very warm welcome to Camelot TV Network, the voice of the Golden Age. And, sometimes the most magical things happen here at Camelot Castle. And one of those things happened last night. And I don't know how it came across my screen, but all of a sudden, I was looking at X and I saw that one of the main opinion formers in relation to Bitcoin had tweeted out a film. And the title of the film was, "What is the Problem?" And I watched this film and I was absolutely stunned by the simplicity and the truth of what I had watched. It was an extraordinary moment, and just on the off chance, I sent a DM to the author of the film, and to my surprise, he came back to me within a few minutes. And what can I say? Here we are today. Joe, a very, very warm welcome to Camelot Castle. This is Joe Bryant, who is the
Hello,
author
everybody.
and the star of this film. To give you an idea as to the effect that this is creating in the Bitcoin universe, Michael Saylor has tweeted out the film. A number of the other major players. I'm sure that by the end of the week, Elon Musk will have seen this film. It is an extraordinary development because what it actually does is it presents the reason why it is to all of our interests to gain an understanding of Bitcoin itself in its purest form. Now, Joe, thank you so much for coming here.
I'm delighted to be here. Not where I expected to be 24 hours ago, so thank you very much for reaching out and getting in touch. Hello to everyone at home. Thank you for watching this.
Yeah, well, could we just start by you describing a little bit about yourself? Who are you? Where have you come from? How did we get to this point?
Okay, well, I'll try and keep it fairly brief, but I'm from the UK, as you can probably tell by my voice, from the north of England, Yorkshire. I went to University at Oxford, studied physics, and then after moved to Goldman Sachs as an equity derivatives trader. I spent about 10 years doing that at several other banks as well. I then left the city to move into sports, so modelling from a mathematical perspective, football primarily, also cricket. With a partner, we built out a automated trading quant engineering business, which we ultimately use to supply automated products for bookmakers to make their offering more interesting for their end customers. We were acquired and then stayed with that company for another 5 years, helping to grow that. But over that period of time, I've come across Bitcoin in 2020. And so about 12 months ago, I was able to take a step out of this business because it reached a natural stage with the growth and the success that I was. A business reaches a certain stage where, and you'll know this, where you want ever greater specialization. And me as a sort of a generalist coming through, doing 3 or 5 things at once, you ultimately replace yourself with people who are better at doing each of those individual things and free you up. And so I took the opportunity to take a step out because all I want to do is to focus on Bitcoin. Mm. And so hence where we've ended up today. Just before Christmas, I was invited by a friend who I've known for a while to a group of his friends who I'd never met. It was a sort of self-curated weekend, so everyone would bring something to talk to everybody else about. And there's only one thing I want to talk to the people about most of the time. And anybody who's listening who knows me is going to sort of nod their head at this, but it's only Bitcoin. And in order to prepare something for these people, I had to, for the very first time, sit down and actually curate and structure my thoughts in a way which would be accessible to somebody else. And for the people who have spent time learning about and trying to understand Bitcoin, we carry a lot in our heads because it's a very complex topic. But very few of us are ever forced to articulate it in a structured way. It's slightly
I
different.
know exactly what you're talking about. We sort of understand it in our own context. But as you say, the people that we speak to about it, we assume that they more or less have an understanding about it. And of course, every single person does have a different understanding.
Yes, I mean, Bitcoin is like a hydra. There are so many different aspects to it. And you can be an expert in one area and know very little about other areas of Bitcoin. But also when you're speaking to somebody who has not yet even really had that first touch point with Bitcoin, the communication gap can be huge. And you know, as Bitcoiners, we tend to sometimes forget how big that gap is, and that it is a struggle to get up the curve with such a unique piece of technology, which is going to have ramifications and implications across every aspect of our lives, to understand where somebody else still is when you've left that place. And so for these 15 people, because I didn't know how much they knew, if anything, about Bitcoin, I had to the ambition talk, teaching, to instead, within 30 minutes, get them to the point where they want to learn about Bitcoin.
Which I think is one of the key barriers to learning, is understanding why you want to study something.
Absolutely.
You know, I know myself, having been a child and having all sorts of knowledge shoved down my throat, most of which I didn't understand why I should be studying it in the first place. Later on in life, I found out that it is vital to teach somebody why they should know something about something. So, and that's when I saw your video last night, and I've seen, and since last night, you do realize this thing has gone completely viral, right the way through the Bitcoin universe. I mean, you must be getting calls all day, haven't you?
It's still a surreal experience, because when I created the presentation for these, who are now friends, but I didn't know them at the time, they also didn't know it was about Bitcoin. And so it was just called "What's the Problem?"
Right. And
so it's only at the very end that Bitcoin's even mentioned for the very first time. And so, you know, these since doing that, and then subsequently being encouraged by them to go and show other people, because the reception was far better than I could have hoped for. They encouraged me to go and make the video, so I spent some time to make the video and then released it. But when I released it, I just hoped somebody would watch it, because I've never released a video before. I didn't even have a YouTube account, and so I created a brand new YouTube account. I had a few hundred followers on X, but mainly bots.
Really?
Because within Bitcoin, a lot of people are in the background.
Of course.
And you know, sometimes that's through choice.
Of course.
You know, because there's privacy and anonymity, but also personality choices, personality attributes within Bitcoin tend to err on the less on people who are perhaps more reserved than being out in the spotlight. And so what's happened since releasing the video has been pretty strange experience for me, but also wonderful at the same time. So to get calls from you after having seen the video and from other people, it is fantastic. Not because I like being in front of the camera or I want any attention, but because it's helping people. It's helping people get to the starting line to understand why they need to learn about Bitcoin. And
so just take me back in terms of, because I mean the reason I called you is because I suppose we all like to think of ourselves as being able to back a winner, And when I saw your video, I said, I don't quite know what this guy has done here. I don't quite understand the phenomena that I'm looking at here. But I can see that this video is going to go viral. This is going to be talked about. Basically, whether you like it or not, I'm afraid you are going to become somewhat of a celebrity within the Bitcoin universe, which is probably the last thing that you want, and it's probably the last reason that you did it. And having spent the evening with you, you know, you're one of the most pleasant, humble, great family men that one could spend time with. I mean, which is marvelous. But you have performed a function here that has long been missing from the Bitcoin universe. And for instance, this is something that I can send to my mother, who is a classic, lovely lady, probably beyond the age that most people would be at when they are starting to look at cryptocurrencies. She wouldn't necessarily, but this is something that she would understand.
Absolutely.
So just what's the purpose of the film?
Well, the purpose of the film is to give anybody who's watching it, be they somebody who already knows something about cryptocurrencies, or even someone who knows something about Bitcoin, to a child, to a pensioner, to anybody. As long as you're a human being with some limited life experience at a minimum, you will be able to understand this presentation. And the video just takes you on this story of an island with two sides of an island. And over the course of those 30 minutes, you go from zero to understanding how a free market works, how the corruption of money through the actions of the government and effectively the big red button which the government has, the metaphorical big red button I should say, to be able to adjust anything about our money that they choose to at any point in time, how those effects ripple through cause and effect to deliver the world we see around us today. And so it's the comparison of the free market with a perfect money versus a corrupted money that we have in our hands today. And we see a stark compare and contrast between the two sides. But it's done in such a way that at every point it's very accessible. And it's entirely logical.
Yes.
And at each point you end up in a position where the world around you now makes sense.
I understand. Yeah.
But also you're aware that it doesn't have to be this way. There is a better alternative. And that better alternative is the government not having access to a big red button to be able to change the rules of the game for everybody whenever they see fit.
Yeah.
And this is every government around the world, because every government that has its own currency has access to a big red button, because they are all fiat currencies. They're not backed by anything. And so by going through this story, you realise very clearly across the island, you know, how we've ended up where we are today, but then we also link that back to what things are in the world around us specifically today. And we look at what the state of play is in the US, and then further down the pecking order, should we say, of fiat currencies down to weaker and weaker currencies. And then you really have this clear skeletal mental framework at the end of it to understand what the risk is that we're all running in our lives today by being in this system.
Wow.
And then once you understand what the problem is, once you understand that the big red button is the problem, all the things around us flow from the big red button. But it doesn't have to be this way. There is an alternative, and that alternative is Bitcoin.
Wow.
And Bitcoin is the solution to the separation of money and state. So up until this point in time, we have never had never had the capability to deliver the separation of money and state. Money has always been dictated by the state once the state gets enough power. And we haven't been able to take it out of the hands of the state because there hasn't been a network or any technology available to create independence between our money and any individual actor. And so Bitcoin, you can think about Bitcoin as being decentralized, neutral money for the world, beyond the reach of anybody to control it or influence it. It is rules without rulers.
Wow.
And it is our path to a global free market in the purest sense of the word. And importantly, it is not something that needs to be forced upon anybody. This is a peaceful
It's
network.
an evolution.
It's for everybody unilaterally to opt in to this. Nobody is stopping you. And what I am absolutely not encouraging anybody to do is buy Bitcoin.
No.
That is not the purpose of the video. The purpose of the video is to encourage you to go and learn about Bitcoin. Because once you start learning about Bitcoin, you will realize why it's so important. It is perfect money. And it's available for everybody. You just have to be willing to do a little bit of work to get started. But this video will help you get to the starting line.
So where can people find this video? And what's the best? Well, other than the fact that I, of course, have tweeted it out on X this evening, so you can see it there, and there should be a link to the video there. But where can they connect to you?
So we've set up a website called satsversusfiat.com, and we can post the link in the thread below this video when it goes out. And there you'll be able to watch the video. The video is available on YouTube, but the embed is there. And the video is recorded in English. I'm speaking in English, but there are 25 plus native languages, all translated by volunteer Bitcoiners around the world. And then if you're keen to learn more, via the same website, there is a Learn section. And there are 5 or 6 additional videos covering different aspects of Bitcoin, from some technical if you're that way inclined, some more on the social aspects, some on the energy, some on the business side. So there will be something that piques your interest regardless of what background, which you can order if you're so inclined, but I would encourage you to watch the videos first.
So you've created a whole ecosystem, in fact. This film is an introduction to an entire educational platform.
Yeah. It's a gateway to Bitcoin. And I've tried to help people get to the starting line, and from the starting line make 1 or 2 little steps. And then once you've made those 1 or 2 little steps, the map that is your educational journey within Bitcoin will start to be revealed. And it is a big map. There are aspects of Bitcoin that you are not even going to touch for the first 6 months of reading about it.
Of course.
But it depends what areas of Bitcoin appeal to you as an individual.
Of course.
So, for example, if you are more, if you come from a background which is involved with energy, for example, you might want to learn more about how proof of work works, how the technical side of the Bitcoin mining process works, what that then means for our energy infrastructure. And you'll very quickly realize that Bitcoin is the solution to the global energy crisis.
So if I wanted to mine Bitcoin here, would I be able to do that?
You can mine Bitcoin wherever you are in the world. That's not the problem. The problem is making it economically viable to do so.
Right.
Because when you are mining Bitcoin, you can think about it similar to mining another hardish asset like gold. And so you have to expend energy to extract gold out of the ground.
Of course.
Right. So there is a proof of work. You cannot produce gold out of thin air in the same way that you can produce fiat money with a click of a keyboard.
Yes.
And so there is a proof of work there. But Bitcoin takes this to its natural conclusion.
Mm.
And the Bitcoin network is a decentralized computer network around the world, which is, and all of these miners are effectively trying to guess a random number every 10 minutes. And doing this allows transactions within the Bitcoin network to be executed.
Mm.
Now, that may sound like a giant waste of time.
Mm.
And on the surface, if you are inclined to paint Bitcoin in a negative light, you would say it uses lots of energy. But that is a feature, not a bug of Bitcoin, because the energy expended secures the network.
Right.
It maintains the independence of the network. It puts it beyond the reach of any nation state or any combination of nation states. And the decentralized nature of it means it's in every corner of the world. And so you cannot capture it. But by expending this energy, not only are you securing the network, you are bringing energy capacity to other parts of the world as a second order consequence. I'll give you an example here. So, there used to be a time in the UK where you could mine Bitcoin on your PC,
Mm-hmm.
on a normal PC,
Mm-hmm.
because there wasn't a lot of competition. But as the Bitcoin price has gone up and up, it's like any free market, people specialize. So people build better chips for doing a dedicated infrastructure around mining. So now you cannot mine with any hope of having an economic return with a normal PC.
Really?
Yeah. And so you now have mining, individual miners and mining rigs all around the world. But that only makes sense if the cost of energy that you're tapping into is sufficiently low to compensate you, to allow the economic equation to work.
Mm.
So if the amount of energy I use is going to be too expensive relative to the amount of Bitcoin I will win when I mine the block, I don't do it. I move to somewhere where the energy is cheaper. And so what Bitcoin naturally does is it sources stranded energy from around the world.
Mm.
And we are surrounded by energy everywhere.
Mm.
Now in the UK, you can't plug it into the wall because it's too expensive. It wouldn't be efficient. But we have reservoirs, we have dams, we have hydroelectric power, we have all of these things around. And we have even more ridiculous examples. We have curtailment of power in the UK.
Mm.
And curtailment of power is when we are generating energy that we don't need at any point in time, because any energy grid is built for maximum capacity, not the average capacity. And so, for example, if half time in the World Cup final, everyone goes and puts the kettle on, there's a surge in power usage, and the grid needs to be able to not, the lights need to not go out when that happens. So you've got to build this excess capacity in the grid. But at night, people are sleeping and there's not much energy being used. Now we've got a grid, and then we've got various renewable and non-renewable energy sources. The renewable energy sources, we don't get to control when they create energy. It's when Mother Nature says energy is going to be created, whether it be wind or water or such. Some are more predictable than others. But when the energy created exceeds the energy being used, and the grid cannot take any more energy, that energy has to be dissipated, has to be curtailed. And the UK government pays energy producers to waste the energy. And it's around $1 billion a year. Crazy orders of magnitude. Now, that is a total waste of taxpayer funds. Bitcoin solves this. Bitcoin solves this because Bitcoin miners can be situated at any stranded energy point. So if you have excess energy at any point in time, what happens when you have excess energy and you're about to curtail it? The price is effectively zero.
So
because you're being paid to waste it.
Yeah, so £1 billion of wastage can be £1 billion of Bitcoin.
Exactly. Well, it's more than, well, yes, you don't waste the energy, so you save yourself £1 billion and you get the Bitcoin as well. Because that energy can be used by Bitcoin miners to further secure the security of the network. and generate revenue. And so what that then means, and Bitcoin miners are capable of doing this because they can switch on and off in a fraction of a second. So whenever the price of the demand for energy goes back up from consumers, they switch off, because beyond a certain price, it doesn't make economic sense to be doing the mining.
Of course.
Because of that calculation. So Bitcoin mining acts as a grid stabilization and buyer of last resort for all energy. And if you think about what that means that if I'm the UK and I'm thinking about how do I increase the amount of energy capacity that we can bring to industry and homes and families in order to lower prices and to boost industry, I should be using Bitcoin mining absolutely everywhere. Because if I can introduce Bitcoin miners, I can effectively shorten dramatically the payback period of any capital investment. Because instead of wasting $1 billion a year, I'm making money. So my break even is a lot shorter, which means I can build things which are more profitable, or I can deploy more capital to increase the size of capacity in the grid. So I can lower prices for everybody. And I know that's a very detailed example of one aspect of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin fixes so many things across every aspect of our lives.
And what you're
beyond
saying is
just money.
Yeah. So what you're saying is on your website.
We've got off track slightly, but
no, that's fine. I'm pleased you did, because that's very interesting. I didn't know that at all. I mean, that sounds like something that every government in the world should be interested in.
Absolutely.
Unless they're suicidal. I mean, they should be very, very interested in that. But what you're saying is on your website, if somebody, let's say, wants to understand that specialized aspect of the use of Bitcoin, then there'll be a module in relation to that. So the film that I tweeted out earlier today, that I saw last night, that's really an introduction to the subject of Bitcoin, and it successfully gets over to somebody such as my 76-year-old mother, if I'm not putting another year on it, 86-year-old. That is going to tell her, well, why she should understand Bitcoin. What is the purpose?
She will understand Bitcoin without doing any further research on Bitcoin. She'll understand what Bitcoin is for. What problem it solves.
What it's for and what problem it solves.
Yeah.
And that is an amazing thing to have communicated. Now, I do have a personal question on this, and I'm very interested. I don't know if any of our viewers are interested, because you hear about all sorts of different types of coins. You hear about Ethereum, all sorts of coins. People talk about these meme coins. I've got very excited about various different meme coins, as some of my viewers will know. But, and of course, we're not recommending any coins, and we would never make any type of a financial recommendation here. However, should somebody... What is the difference between Bitcoin? Isn't Bitcoin just the same as any other type of a cryptocurrency? Why does it matter? Why can't you just put your money into Ethereum or one of these other coins, or whatever it is?
The difference is night and day.
Right.
Unfortunately, we are at a point in the general understanding across the media with regards to Bitcoin that leads to conflation between Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, which then confuses the public.
So they just can't mentally differentiate.
Yes, the media tends to use cryptocurrency and Bitcoin almost interchangeably.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
And that's a total misrepresentation. Now, I'm not saying it's deliberate, because it's a complicated topic, and unless quite often you have people writing about it who wouldn't really be able to explain the difference. Now, so I think it's just a natural effect in most cases of just where we are right now. Now, what I would strongly encourage the people watching this to think about is, I imagine in most people's heads there are two parts of the world. One is sort of normal world, we'll call fiat, which is fiat currencies, fiat money. And on the other side is cryptocurrencies, of which Bitcoin is a part. Probably a small part in people's minds, based on the amount that the other coins get talked about. So fiat on one side, cryptocurrency, of which Bitcoin is a part. That I suspect that's what most people's mental model is like. It is totally wrong. Totally wrong. So I would encourage everybody, put that model in the bin. Okay. The correct model, the way to think about this is fiat, normal world fiat currency on one side, of which cryptocurrency is a part. Okay. And on the other side is Bitcoin.
So you see most other cryptocurrencies as fiat, in fact.
They not see them, they are fiat. They are fiat. Bitcoin is a decentralized, neutral money for the world. Okay, nobody controls it. It's rules without rulers. Cryptocurrency is centralized technology, largely venture-backed, which is just technology looking for product market fit, but it's centralized. It has a creator, an owner, a CEO, people who have awarded themselves tokens before releasing it to everybody else. All of these things are just exactly the same as what we see in the fiat system, just with fewer protections for people and greater room for fraud. And so I strongly recommend that people look at nothing else other than Bitcoin. Everything else is going to zero, just to be super clear, going to zero. And so hopefully that will help people making some big mistakes on all of this stuff over here. Now, people say, oh, well, what, some of it has, some utility or something like that. Quite possibly in some respects. But you should think about these things as speculative investments in technology enterprises, in the same way as you would invest in an early stage business a friend might create. They are absolutely not decentralized neutral money for the world. They're night and day. So I hope I've been
just
very
you've been very just for the purpose of our viewers at home. Joe, you've worked in the city.
Yeah. So I spent 10 years there.
Yeah, you've worked for Goldman Sachs. You worked for Morgan Grenfell, did you say? Or
Morgan Stanley.
Morgan Stanley.
Yeah.
You were trading in derivatives.
That's right.
So you didn't come down financially in the last shower of rain.
No.
You understand financial instruments across the boards, and this is not a subject that has been difficult for you to assimilate. And I just want to really say thank you so much for, creating a product really that makes it possible for other people who perhaps don't have your background in finance to understand why there is this need for Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is different to all the other cryptocurrencies. And the other thing that I should mention, which I was quite surprised about, is you're not profiting from this venture at all.
No.
This is somebody who, and this is what amazed me and why actually I invited you down to stay and said, well, let's have a chat. Because you're doing this purely as a philanthropic venture. You've made the film, you've paid for the film yourself, you've made everything. And you're, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're doing this purely as a non-profit venture because it's the right thing to do to educate people into Bitcoin.
Yes. As I was saying to you before off camera, this is an accidental. This presentation to help educate some friends.
Because you were going off on a jolly
to
Spain or Portugal or wherever it was. You were going off on a jolly, and everybody was going to bring along like a show and tell, like a little show and tell.
Something to talk about, and they encouraged me, given how well that went down, they encouraged me to share it with other people. And so, we struggle within the Bitcoin community to easily bring other people with us because it requires motivated effort to sort of break the wall of understanding.
Well, even Michael Saylor says that it takes 100 hours of research study to begin to understand Bitcoin. Once you've done your 100 hours,
Yeah.
then. But I think you've just chopped that in half, frankly.
Well,
Maybe even more, because I think anybody watching your video can understand the reason for Bitcoin within half an hour.
well, that's the plan. That's the plan. I think Michael Saylor is more talking about having a more of a detailed understanding of Bitcoin. You haven't understood it fully, but you grasp it to an extent that you could then probably explain it to somebody else. Now, this video is not going to get you there, but it's going to give you the skeletal framework of thinking about it, that when you see the next video or you come across the next piece of writing, you can then place that into that skeleton that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then gradually you'll build up a fuller picture of Bitcoin, but you'd still be able to, if I asked you why it was important, you would still be able to answer. You know, Bitcoin is the way we separate money and state. That's it. But you understand why. You understand why that is required. And then once you're at that point, then it's up to you whether you want to put in the 100 hours.
No, of course.
Or the 1 hour or the 2 hours. But it's not a commitment to 100 hours up front. It's watching the next video.
Yeah.
And then the second step is easy. The third step is easier. And then at some point, it will switch for you. Much like the rationale for creating this video and then sharing and talking with people is that the penny will drop with you that not only is this the right thing to do, but you need to try and bring as many other people with you as possible. Because what is hard to, I think, appreciate for people who have not found Bitcoin yet, who haven't really placed it mentally in a position where it makes sense for them, and certainly then haven't gone through and done those extra 100 hours, is that you struggle to understand what happens to you as a person when you do that. Because it puts everything else in context. You understand why you see all these issues around yourselves today. And they are all connected back to this thing. And so there is a saying within Bitcoin that you come for the money and you stay for the money. But what that means is the fact that Bitcoin's price has gone up a lot over the 15, 16 years, it inevitably attracts people's attention. So, what is this thing? I should learn about it. Maybe I could make a quick buck or something like that. So you come for the money, but then once you start to learn about it, you realise why it's not just important, but why it's critical for humanity that we have Bitcoin. And then you're staying for the money.
Yeah.
You're staying to fix the money for everybody. And that is the point that everybody will get to eventually. It's just a question of when you take that first step. But we're all going to get there. It's inevitable.
I mean, it's remarkable now. I mean, probably the world leader that is most in advance of any other world leader in relation to Bitcoin now, I would say, is President Bukele. I don't know if I've said that correctly.
Yeah, Bukele, yeah.
Bukele, who started buying a national reserve of Bitcoins. How long do you think it is before one of the big countries realizes what Bitcoin is fully, understands it fully, and starts to actually create a national reserve for Bitcoin?
I think that's already happening.
Well, in San Salvador, of course, it is.
El Salvador, Bhutan are mining Bitcoin with their stranded energy.
Yeah. They
are going to become one of the wealthiest countries in Asia because of this. Which is precisely to my point before, you can monetize stranded energy. And El Salvador also have plans to do that with their volcano.
Yeah.
And you also have, I think, a number of states across the Middle East and other areas around the world who are accumulating Bitcoin quietly. Because there is a game theory aspect to Bitcoin.
Yes.
In the future, in the not too distant future, every person, every company, every country will want Bitcoin. They will actively prefer Bitcoin. and it is a limited supply. There will never ever be any more of these. And the characteristics of Bitcoin means that it is ultimately going to be the pristine collateral that sits at the bottom of the entire financial system and will become the global reserve asset. And I'll say in my view, but watch the video and please go through those thought steps, mental steps yourself. And if that is the expectation or the assumption, then it's a race. It is simply a race. And for any national government not to be thinking about a national Bitcoin strategic reserve of whatever form is a failure of governance, because the geopolitical backdrop for the entire world is on the verge of changing. And I fully expect there are some major states already buying Bitcoin. They wouldn't announce it until they bought a sufficient amount to ensure that they're not a country and you start buying Bitcoin. If you tell everyone you're buying Bitcoin, it increases the price.
Do you think America could be already starting to buy without telling anybody?
I don't know about the US. The US already, some countries already have.
Well, I think a lot of countries have got stuff they confiscated, like Britain has.
The UK,
a fair amount, actually, doesn't it?
Through sheer luck, we are incredibly well positioned when it comes to Bitcoin.
Why? What happened? What did we do?
So we're the third largest national holder of Bitcoin.
How did that happen?
Through prior confiscations of criminal activities.
Wow.
Prior, when Bitcoin was worth a lot less.
Right.
So as part of plea deals or convictions, people hand back assets. So the state cannot take Bitcoin from you, but they've been actively handed over as part of processes. And now they've grown in value to a point where they are meaningful for us.
Right.
And we are...
I think I saw the UK has like 66,000 Bitcoins or something.
It's around that. It's around that number.
Yeah.
Which puts us third in the national list. The US first, and I believe it's China second.
Yeah.
And so we are already starting in a good position. But it doesn't mean we should stop there.
No.
Every other country is looking at everyone else thinking, or it should be, how many Bitcoin do we have versus what they have? And as soon as one of the big players
theoretically, could a country print fiat money using their printing machine to buy Bitcoin? Theoretically,
it's more than theoretical. It's absolutely what they will do. Because when the geopolitical Bitcoin is about to become a national security issue,
really,
for countries. Because as soon as you see your enemy or a significant player change its policy,
or a competitor,
change its policy with respect to what it considers to be a strategic reserve asset, if you do not take that into account, you are failing. Because the floor is shifting. People are not thinking about just gold anymore. Bitcoin is like gold on steroids. And there's never going to be...
Yeah, because you often hear it's the equivalent of gold. I don't see it as the equivalent of gold at all.
No, it's...
I mean, try taking gold or driving a ton of gold up to London or something. I mean, it's a nightmare.
It's a helpful mental model for people to think of Bitcoin like a digital gold. That's helpful, but it's so much smaller than it actually is. But as a starting point, it's not a terrible one.
No.
But it's so much better. And we'll come back to the question on the strategic reserves, but just on this gold versus Bitcoin point, people often, and many of the viewers at home may own gold or believe they own gold. You own gold to try and maintain your purchasing power outside of pounds, because we know we can't keep pounds in the bank and maintain purchasing power. They're just worth less every year. And so you go to something like gold. Now, once you own more than a little bit, you don't want to keep that in your house, because that's worth a lot. So what do? You think, well, how am I going to protect this? And the natural outcome is, I'll put it in a gold vault, or I'll buy gold that is in a gold vault, because they're professionals at securing the gold.
Which is essentially another piece of paper.
But what you get in return is a piece of paper saying you own gold. And so what you really own is a promise. A promise that if I ever want to take that gold out, A, it's there, B, the gold vault says I can have it, and C, the government says I can have it. And those seem like obvious things, but they're not things that people tend to think about or attach much risk to.
Yeah, and how many people actually, when they buy a lot of gold, do they actually go along and take a look at the gold and prove it?
And even if you did, would you be able to tell that it's real? You wouldn't.
No.
You wouldn't be able to tell that it's real. And there's been plenty of instances where the gold held by central banks has turned out to be fake. Because it's diluted with other metals, or other metals of the same density are inside it. This has happened many times. Whereas if you think about Bitcoin, even if you thought about it in a very narrow way, just as being digital gold, Bitcoin is an explicitly hard asset. It moves at the speed of light. Nobody can stop you sending it or receiving it, and you hold it yourself. It blows gold out the water on any measure you care to evaluate it on. And so even if you think about it in that narrow sense, it's a good starting point. It is so much more, as we've talked about. It's a solution for the energy crisis. It's self-sovereignty. It's a personal mental upgrade once you adopt it. And it solves all these second, third order issues that we see in the world today, none of which gold can do.
No.
And so it's a very limited view, but a meaningful one to start with. But to come back to the strategic reserve question, inevitably governments are going to either raise debt or print money, and in some cases the lines between those are blurred, because there's creative ways to create money in the economy. But it makes natural sense, if you have access to a big red button as a government, which allows you to press it and change anything about the money, so print more money, to buy the only thing in the universe that is absolutely scarce, then of course you're going to do it.
Yeah.
You're definitely going to do it as soon as your neighbour does it.
Well, this is one of the ways I've tried to get it over to people is if you go with Elon Musk's theory that human beings will eventually be an interplanetary species, at the time that we are settling the outer moon of Arcturus, or one of the planets that surrounds it, however many thousands of years, there will still only be 21 million bitcoins.
That's right.
Just a technical question: how many satoshis are there to a bitcoin?
So again, people tend to think, and not everyone, but the common misconception is you can only buy a bitcoin.
Yeah.
And they look at the price of Bitcoin at around $100,000 and think, well, I can't afford $100,000. Bitcoin can be broken down into 100 million pieces. And so
each Bitcoin
is 100 million satoshis, in the same way that a dollar is 100 cents.
Yes.
And so you can buy a satoshi, which is effectively 1,000th of a dollar, or 1/10 of a penny.
1/10 of a penny?
Yeah.
Really?
1/10 of a cent.
Right.
And so you don't need to buy a Bitcoin.
And can the satoshi be broken up even more than that once it's...
Technically it can. You can you can transact in millisats over the Lightning Network, which is
Right.
probably another layer down in terms of the rabbit hole for people watching. But one of the oft claims that people make about Bitcoin is that it's too slow,
Right.
or it can't handle enough transactions.
Yes.
And this is often cited as the rationale for an alternative cryptocurrency. Now, that is disingenuous at best. And it's disingenuous on two fronts. One, it's the only aspect that the other cryptocurrency is specialized in. It loses the security, it loses the immutability, it loses the all the other aspects that Bitcoin brings. But the key one it's focused on is the ability to transact quickly. Now, within Bitcoin, you have what's called the Lightning Network, which is a native layer on top of the base layer of Bitcoin, where you effectively open up channels to each other, which allows us, as two individuals or two businesses, just two unconnected parties of any nature, to instantaneously send sats back and forward. So it's at the speed of light, virtually zero cost, which solves the too slow, not many transactions issues that other cryptocurrencies quite often point at Bitcoin about. And this is what is going to solve the payments infrastructure globally, which is a whole other rabbit hole to go down.
I think one of the most interesting things that I've learned this evening is that the mental construct. People have Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies over here, and then fiat over here. And what I've understood from our conversation, certainly from thinking it through with you this evening, as we were chatting earlier, Bitcoin is over here, and then fiat and the other cryptocurrencies are really on this side of the ledger.
Yes.
And at the moment, as we speak, to my knowledge, there are no other cryptocurrencies that come anywhere near Bitcoin in terms of being perfect money.
Correct. And I think one thing that people at home probably don't realize, or maybe don't realize, is that Bitcoin's entirely open source. And so you at home could go and just duplicate Bitcoin. You could create a copy of it, call it Bitcoin 2.
Yes.
But everybody in the world is free to do so.
Yes.
And so people often say, well, how can Bitcoin be which is really interesting question, is how do you create digital scarcity if everybody can copy it? And the reality is that and it comes back to the energy question, the Bitcoin network is so secure because everybody that joins it contributes to the security of it.
And everybody that joined it in the past, and all the people that are in it now, are sort of standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before, in a way. Is that?
Well, it's from several aspects. Many people hold Bitcoin now, and the Bitcoin that's held now was mined in the past, that used energy, that had value. People did work, and that work was reflected in the creation of Bitcoin. And the total, what's called hash rate for Bitcoin, which is the amount of energy effectively going into securing the Bitcoin ledger, to ensure it's immutable, to ensure that nobody can change it, to ensure that it's neutral for everybody, just grows and grows and grows. The energy securing that network is far greater than any nation state or combination could ever produce to try and target it. Your copy of Bitcoin 2 probably runs on your computer. It's a copy of the network. It's absolutely not the same thing. It's you at home with Bitcoin 2. It's not tens of thousands of nodes all around the world and huge amounts of energy securing this thing over here. And that's why Bitcoin is going to be the only one.
Wow.
But it takes a slight nuance to think about why that is the case.
Well, Joe, you've been extraordinarily Kind, I've just got one more question for you.
Okay.
And you've been very gracious with your time, and I thank you
Oh, it's
so
been a
much.
pleasure. So thank you for having me.
No, I really thank you for coming down. Why are you doing this then? You're not doing it for the money. You are putting a lot of hours in.
Yeah.
Driven down here at your own expense. You're driving around the country. You're going and talking to people, and when you look at the website, it's beautifully done. You've obviously spent a lot of time on it.
Thank you.
Why are you doing this? What is in it for you? What you know? And I know people have a very hard time thinking with something if they can't understand. And he's made this. Why?
Because there is no more important issue in the world today than ensuring we get the separation of money and state. Bitcoin is a civilizational level upgrade for us, like the internet. It's going to be a one-time event, and it's going to change everything. It's going to change humanity in a way that makes the internet pale in comparison. Because with the internet, it only impacts our offline lives in a sort of second order way. Whereas money touches everything. It's online, it's offline. There is no escape from it. And money is the center of our lives. But we spend our entire lives working for something that someone else can create for free. And that's just wrong. That's just fundamentally wrong. And governments having access to this big red button and controlling fiat currency creates all the issues that we see around us today, which you'll see from the film. So there is no greater priority for me in my working life than ensuring as many people as possible get to the starting line with understanding why we need Bitcoin to ensure that we can deliver the separation of money and state than anything else.
Wow.
And the separation of money and state will happen eventually, but it will happen through the actions of everybody individually. Everybody can opt in peacefully to the Bitcoin network. And once enough of us do, it forces the hand of government. They lose control to the people, back to neutral money. And as a result, we will see a societal uplift in just incomprehensible ways. And some of this may sound like hyperbole, but I assure you, once you start learning about Bitcoin, you will see what I mean. And so I would encourage everybody to start by watching the video. And if you like the video and you want to learn more, even if you dislike the video, go and learn more anyway, because maybe there's something there that will change your mind. And please reach out to me if you want to discuss it, or I can help in any way. And I would say, this is not me. This is a video that I've created, and now it's many of us. It's hundreds of Bitcoiners around the world are picking up the ball and running with it. So we have volunteers doing all these different languages. We've translated all of the materials, the slides, the speaker notes.
So how many languages is this thing in?
We've more than 25 and native
Wow.
subtitles. And we've got 4 languages currently live: English, Spanish, German and French, with the slides and speaker notes and the transcript. We're going to do all 25 plus, because there's still more coming in. It'll probably be low 30s in total when we're finished in maybe a month. All the materials will be out for everybody, open source, with a Creative Commons non-commercial license, which means you can download them, you can give them to your friends.
So people can go onto your website and use it, use the presentation, unless they're big commercial, in which case they pay a royalty.
It's non-commercial. So the idea is, it's a non-commercial license, so you can use it in any way you like, as long as you're not charging for it. So this,
you can't say fairer than that. I mean, that is a very, very good deal. Would it be fair to say that conceptually, Bitcoin represents the financial architecture for the new golden age. Could you say that it's like it's the missing piece financially in terms of the money that we actually need to secure a true, just, fair, ethical, sane civilization?
That's exactly what it is. Bitcoin is money for the world. Bitcoin is neutral money for the world. And it's going to unlock an age of humanity which is just going to be so productive. It will unlock the global free market.
Wow. And it sounds to me like it will affect so many different layers of life that, I mean, we could probably be on here all night.
Yeah.
I'm actually quite thankful that we've done this as a pre-record, because we would be getting question after question after question. But I do think that I'm going to have you back here for another session.
I would love to.
And I would love to do that. So if any of you at home have got questions here, Joe has pulled something off. I've been looking for this for about 3 years. I realized about 3 years ago that even the brightest people in the world who call themselves financial geniuses, truthfully, really did not understand Bitcoin. They thought it was the same as other cryptocurrencies. They were highly confused about what are some of the brightest people I know. And as I think I told you at dinner, they have a saying in Saudi Arabia, in the empty quarter, where they say the mistake of a clever man is 1,000 times the mistake of an idiot. And there are a lot of very, very clever people out there that think they know what Bitcoin is. But after watching your film, I realized whatever they think they know, they don't know. And maybe some of them do know what they do know. But the speed with which Bitcoin gets adopted is very much about the speed at which you can communicate the idea to the average common denominator of life and include everybody, because it's an inclusive concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people do struggle more with it than others. And sometimes that is because of where they are coming from.
Yeah.
But you can think of Bitcoin first and foremost as an ego test.
Yes.
If you let go of your ego and are open-minded, you'll see rewards. But if you hold on to what you believe you know, then it's going to be very hard.
You're going to struggle. That's a great lesson for life. And as somebody with a sizable ego, I'm sure I'm going to have a struggle with it. There we go. None of us are perfect, but it is an absolute pleasure to have had you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much
for your
having me.
And Joe, thank you.
All right, thank you.
For all those people out there that are not going to have the opportunity to thank you personally, I would like to thank you for the incredible gift that you have given to humanity. Thank you so much. That is such a gift to humanity. Thank you.
Those are lovely words, and I'm not quite sure how to respond, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the people at home watching now. I do hope you take the time to watch the video and then share it with people that you care about, because we need everyone to see it.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. Now, well, that was really a phenomenal interview which we conducted earlier today. And I know a lot of you, I've seen in the comments, have been very curious as to where they can see this video. And the good news is that I do have a way of playing it here for you. And I'm just going to play it now. What I would like you to do is, if you have any questions at all, please put them in the comments on either any one of the social media accounts, and we will try to details. But I think while we've got you here, by the way, I hope you're enjoying our new rebranding of Camelot Castle TV, the voice of the Golden Age. We're going to be slightly changing the format. What we're going to be doing is we are going to be interviewing key players in the world that are helping to bring the new Golden Age into being. So if there's anybody out there that you think is not getting the attention that they should get, or if you think that they have a contribution to truth, to freedom, to creating the new game, which, as I say, some people are calling the new Golden Age, let me know, because I would very much like to. Camelot works very well for an interview. And by the way, I can confirm that the treacle tart at Camelot has reached a whole new level. I got into terrible trouble today because I had a piece of treacle tart, and I'm supposed to be on a bit of a diet, but I have to report to you that the treacle tart here has reached realms of perfection. And seeing as we've been talking about perfect money, least we can do is mention our perfect treacle tart. Anyway, here is the film, and lovely to see you all again. And I'm just going to put it on here for you. Here we go.
Hey Joe.
Hey.
What's this all about?
Well, we have a problem, and it's a very big problem. And unfortunately, most people aren't aware of it. It doesn't matter what your personal views are, your politics, your religion, or where you are. And once you see the problem, you can't unsee it. It's like a one-way door. But thankfully, we also have the solution. And it's this solution that I'm so passionate about sharing. And it's what makes me just so optimistic for the future. The challenge I find, though, is how can anybody fully value a solution unless they understand what the problem is? And so I put this presentation together for some friends, and it assumes no knowledge other than just being a human being with some life experience. And they encouraged me then to make this presentation into video so I can share it with everyone. So I hope you enjoy. Welcome to What's the Problem? So what is the problem? Well, too many, unfortunately. I probably could have written twice as many things down on this slide. I think we all have that sense of unease. We all feel internally that things are not moving in the right direction in our lives, in the world. Like things are becoming harder, not easier. And I think for most of us, we would recognize some elements of these things on the screen as touching our lives directly or indirectly. And what I'm here today to show you is that all these things may seem unconnected, but they're really not. The primary cause of all of these is the quality of our money. Now we're going to do this through a story. So imagine there's this far off world where you have hundreds of smart people traveling on a ship. And this ship gets wrecked on a deserted island. This deserted island is so far from everywhere else, they're effectively cut off. But the island is resource rich. It has everything they could possibly need to rebuild society. But because these people have come from an advanced civilization, they know exactly where they're ultimately going to get back to. But now they're starting again with nothing. But what's also clear is that they need some way of trading with each other once they start to rebuild. So they prioritize deciding on what to use for their new money, and suspend your disbelief slightly further in that they have, despite not having anything, the ability to create whatever monetary system they want with whatever characteristics. So the first question they need to answer is, what makes good money? And there are 7 things. So these guys have the ability to create whatever they want. So instead of just creating good money, they create the perfect money. And the perfect money is scarce, which means it has a fixed supply forever, and is instantly and costlessly verifiable by everybody. So if everybody can check it whenever they want at no cost, then you can verify for yourself that nobody's creating any extra. It needs to be portable, so you can effortlessly move and store it with negligible costs. It needs to be divisible, and the perfect money would be infinitely divisible. It needs to be durable. It can't rot or go off. It can't deteriorate. So the perfect money exists forever. It's fungible, which means every piece is forever the same as every other piece. It needs to be acceptable. So everyone, anywhere, can both send and receive. And the really important one is it needs to be censorship resistant. You hold it yourself. Nobody can take it away from you without your permission, and no one can stop you sending or receiving it. So this is great. They decide on perfect money. But then there's a disagreement. Two leaders emerge from within the population. The first, Satoshi, he says, well, given these are the characteristics of perfect money, that's going to be true today, true tomorrow, and true forever. So we should lock them in, you should never change. Whereas Fiatello, he says, well, I get that. I get this is the characteristics of perfect money, and I totally agree. But what if there's an emergency? What if we need to change something? What if the people we put in charge of our money feel like it's not working and need to make an adjustment? I think we should have the perfect money, but we should also have a big red button, which allows someone to press it and change any of the characteristics if we need to. Of course, no one ever will, but just in case. This becomes an irreconcilable disagreement. So a fairly drastic solution, but they build a huge wall right down the middle of this island. And on one side, they create the currency called Satoshis, which is perfect money always. And on the other side, are Fiatellos, which is perfect money, but with the option to change it. Now this wall is so big, it cuts off the communication and the trade between both sides on the island. So effectively, they're cut off from one another. So to begin with, nobody has anything on either side of the island. So everyone's starting from zero. And initially, people have to be self-sufficient. Each person is fishing for their food, cutting down trees for the wood to make fires, and also for houses, and then they're also building their own shelters. Now, even though they have perfect money, there's very limited trading here because people are working hard just to satisfy their day-to-day needs across all of these goods. But people are different. Some people are better at some things than others. And so people quickly realize that if I spend my time focusing on the things I'm good at, I'm reducing the amount of time I spend on things that I'm poor at, then I can contribute more to society. I can increase the amount of goods I can provide to society in the same amount of time as the average person. So the woodcutter spends all his time now cutting down wood. He stops fishing, he stops building shelters. And because he's spending his time cutting down wood, he increases the quantity of wood available to everyone else versus 3 people spending a third of their time each, because he's good at it. And not only does the increase in the quantity of wood available reduce the price of wood for everybody on the island, the quality is also high. He's better at doing it. He produces a higher quality output. So prices fall and quality increases. And not only that, he's not the only woodcutter. Now, because processes continue to improve, the woodcutter can now satisfy the needs of the rest of the population for wood in a smaller amount of time. He can then take that time and think about his own processes, his own innovations. Maybe he can make cutting down wood even more efficient. And if he does that, it drives prices lower. It drives quality higher. Maybe he reaches the end of his innovation within his woodcutting and then uses the excess money and excess capital he has to invest in other people. Maybe he lends it to the fisherman who then builds a boat to increase the amount of fish the fisherman can catch for everybody. So what happens over time in a free market with perfect money, prices go down forever and quality goes up forever. So what people see on both sides of the island is that the purchasing power of their money starts to increase. Goods cost less tomorrow than they do today, so the price of tomorrow is lower. The purchasing power of both currencies is increasing at about 3% a year. And this lifts the quality of life. Life becomes cheaper and cheaper over time for everybody, not just those people who are most productive in society. But the key thing is the money itself is becoming more valuable over time. That is, until these guys come along. So now, because the society is growing and the population is growing, both sides of the island elect a government. Now, it doesn't matter if the government is left or right, big, small, up, down, doesn't matter. They are all the same when it comes to this. Now, however well run the government is, inevitably it will hit a deficit at some point. And that means it's spending more than it's receiving. And that could be through mismanagement, but it could just be through external circumstance, like a natural disaster or something like this. The causes are not important, but it will happen over the course of time, inevitably. But now we see a divergence across both sides of the island. Satoshi, he only has two choices here. To balance the budget, he needs to either raise taxes or cut spending, or maybe a combination of the two. Whereas Fiatello, he has exactly the same choices, but he also has a big red button. And the important thing here is they're both up for re-election. And Fiatello knows that if he raises taxes or he cuts spending, it's going to cost him votes. So just this time, he decides to press the big red button and print a little bit of extra money for the government. Okay, so what are the consequences? Well, for Satoshi, not great. He cannot hide those changes from the population because they're paying more in taxes or they're getting less back from the government from its spending. So he loses the election, but government reduces in size naturally. So now overall, the efficiency in the economy is increased, but not only this, the social balance is improved within the economy because people now realize there is no free money. Taxes need to balance spending. But the important thing is prices continue to fall and quality continues to increase. Now for Fiatello, great news, he gets re-elected. And to start with, it's consequence-free. Like he thinks this is the greatest thing ever. I get re-elected and there's no downside. But something's changed. So what's happened? Fiatello's pressed the big red button, which has printed some money for the government, which has debased the currency. So what does that mean? He's increased the amount of money in the economy overnight. But he hasn't increased the amount of goods and services available in the economy overnight. So now there's more Fiatellos washing around compared to yesterday for each piece of the goods and the services. And this has three major impacts. The first is a distortion of price signals. The second is that it increases input costs for businesses. And the third, it leads to asset inflation. And that first one, distorting price signals, well, prior to Fiatello pressing the big red button here, all price changes in the economy were purely a function of demand and supply because this was a free market with perfect money. But what's happened now is that money has entered the economy not to everybody equally or even in proportion to the amount of money everybody holds. The money has entered the economy via the government, and it enters via the government into the accounts of companies and people connected directly or indirectly to the government. So what Fiatello starts to see is price increases in certain parts of the economy. So the signal to everybody else in the economy is that there's an imbalance of supply and demand just in these sectors. So you see a misallocation of capital by the entrepreneurs in the market caused by the money printer. But not only that, it's human capital. It's smart people, it's active people who are trying to be productive, get sucked in closer to the government and not servicing the rest of the economy. The second is that business input costs increase. Now, every single business in Fiatello's country has at least a human being and some raw material inputs like energy or even some harder raw materials. Now, because the costs of these things have gone up, these businesses now need to try and change something about their product to maintain the small profit margins that ensure that they can continue in business. Now, the first and most obvious one is just to pass on the price increase to the customer. The second is to keep the price the same, and the quality the same, but just shrink the product. So instead of having 100 grams, it's now 90 grams, but for the same price. Or the third one is to reduce the input costs. Now this is where consumer inflation comes from. This is the only source of consumer inflation, is the money printer, causing businesses to make these changes. But if a business passes on the price increase outright, or it shrinks the product and the customer now just needs to buy more of it to satisfy the fact that they needed 100 grams, not 90 grams, both of those things reduce affordability. So the population is becoming poorer. They're going to have less disposable income, despite buying the same as what they bought yesterday. If instead the business chooses to keep the price the same, the size the same, but just reduce the cost, the most obvious thing to do is just to fire people, which leads to unemployment. And now there are fewer people with jobs, which reduces the overall affordability for the population in Fiatello's world. But not only that, now the government's got a second issue it needs to solve. How does it help support all these people who are recently unemployed? But the most insidious way is for companies to reduce their input quality. And so what Fiatello starts to see is there's a rise in obesity across the population, because the food that was previously fresh and had high quality ingredients is replaced with ever lower quality ingredients and more industrialized sludge. So this leads to obesity. It also leads to a myriad of secondary health issues, which causes a health crisis. And now the government has to step in and figure out how it needs to support all these people who are now unhealthy. The third is asset inflation. Since Fiatello pressed the big red button, asset prices have been going up. The stock market goes higher and higher and higher. House prices go higher and higher and higher. He thinks I'm some sort of economic genius. But they're going up in price because he's just created more Fiatellos. So anybody who knows that there are more Fiatellos in the system, of course, wouldn't sell their asset for the same as they did yesterday. They would take into account the fact that there are just more Fiatellos in the system. So this is what is driving these prices up. But this asset increase is good for the people who own the assets, but not for the people who don't. So he has a wealth inequality begin to emerge across the economy. And not just that, because house prices are now more expensive, the rent is more expensive. So he sees increased levels of homelessness. And this increased levels of homelessness, guess what, require more government intervention to try and deal with. And now asset prices are flying, the stock market's on fire. The prevailing perception across the population is, why would I not invest? Why would I just keep the money? I should be buying the stock market, I should be investing, I should be buying a second home to rent out, I should be buying speculative assets because they never go down, they just go up. If I don't invest, I'm a fool. And because the assets are going up, the banks are pushing ever more leverage for people, pushing bigger and bigger mortgages to individuals, to loans to companies. But now that house prices have gone up, and now that everyone has more debt, at the same time as families are struggling with affordability of day-to-day life, it's now much harder to buy a house. So families where previously they could have one main earner and afford to buy a house with a mortgage can't anymore. You now need both parents working. Both parents working to afford the mortgage and afford to live. And when that happens, people spend less time together and you start to see the breakdown of the nuclear family. They spend less time with their children. They can afford to have fewer children. Now, because you have decline in birth rates, Fiatello starts to see a change in his demographics across the population. Fewer children are being born, whereas the older generations are living longer. And he now starts to realize that the promises he made to these older generations about being able to retire at a certain age or having a good quality of life or defined income in their retirement can't be delivered upon. For those not lucky enough to be able to buy a house, who are maybe stuck renting, whereas before they could think about renting the same place for 3 years or 5 years because the rent goes up too much every year. So now they're thinking about 1 year, maybe 2 years. You're planning less for the future. Maybe you're putting off getting married, putting off having children. You start to prioritize today at the expense of tomorrow. People see that they're saving their Fiatellos never gets them anywhere because the asset prices are going up too quickly. They'll never be able to buy a house. So if you never be able to buy a house, then prioritize living your best life and going on a holiday and spending more, enjoying yourself. But for those not fortunate to be in this position, for those that every day is a struggle, feeding themselves and their families, housing themselves and their families, of decline. Now, every day is addiction, various forms of addiction, including opioids across Fiatello's island, which leads to yet more of a health crisis and yet more intervention from the government. And all of this leads to a mental health crisis across the population. And now the government finds itself in a position where, because it's pressed the big red button, it's created a whole range of secondary issues that now it needs to step in and try and solve. And because it has to step in and try and solve these things, it means the government needs to divert more capital to these areas of the economy, which again is a greater misallocation of capital, which pulls more entrepreneurs into the wrong parts of the economy through the distortion of the price signals. And between the increased leverage in the economy driven by the banks and the misallocation of capital, it sows the seeds of the next emergency. And Fiatello has only one choice, and that's to press the big red button again. And now he's starting to realise that actually this wasn't consequence-free. But now he's lurching from crisis to ever bigger crisis. He presses the big red button, which debases the currency, which leads to bigger government and more involvement in everything. And now not only is the government bigger, but the government has spawned a series of parasitic industries attached to it. Big Pharma, who are increasingly involved with the government to try to deal with the symptoms, but not the causes of the various health crises, never incentivized to actually cure a patient, just to treat them long term, because a healthy customer is a lost customer. Big Food pushes for ever lower food standards across the economy. The military-industrial complex pushes for ever greater spending on defence, both at home and on foreign shores. Wall Street are up to their eyeballs in debt, and now so leveraged that the government wants to protect them. They can't be allowed to fail, because if the banks fail, the population loses their money, the government falls. The government also continues to make unproductive investments trying to deal with the secondary issues it's created, but also investments driven from whatever political ideology the government has. And all of these things are effectively now crony corporatism. It's very hard to see where the government ends and these industries begin. The success of the government is deeply intertwined with the success of the industries. These industries start to ask the government to become regulators. You need to regulate us to protect the public. But this regulation, all it does is make competition harder. The 1, 2, 3 companies in each of these areas are now very, very close to the government. They supply the people for the regulator. When the regulators end their tenure, they go back and work for these companies. It stops smaller companies coming in and competing with them to then supply the government on better terms or with higher quality product. So quality starts to decline and prices start to rise, which of course is great news for these companies because profit margin. What happens then is the media gets captured. The government is teetering to maintain social stability. It's now protecting these industries at the expense of the population rather than the other way around. And because of this social balance that it needs to maintain, it can't allow free speech, dissent, alternative opinions, or questioning of anything that undermines the legitimacy of the government in any way. Not only that, the biggest advertisers for the media companies are the companies connected to the government. So the media companies increasingly don't want to upset their advertisers. And when you have a captured media and a military-industrial complex fomenting strife on foreign shores, forever wars. And the wars themselves are actively supported by the Fiatello population because all they see in their media is that we have to do this because it's the right thing to do. And between the forever wars and the banking system bailouts and the excessive debt, it leads to the next emergency, but this time it's just so much bigger. And the only choice he has is to press the big red button again. But this time it's different. It's a massive erosion of trust. Every time he presses the button, more and more people become aware of what is happening. And this goes round and round and round until something breaks. And now Fiatello's starting to get quite worried. So what's happening to the money? Well, instead of increasing 3% a year in purchasing power. He's now losing 7% a year because he's printing 10% a year of extra money. And not only that, he's undermining the productivity in the economy by distorting all the price signals. So what happens to the Fiatello Island population? Well, the poor, who are on fixed wages, have very low income security and no assets. They can't win. They just get poorer every single year. For the middle earners, who have fixed salaries and mixed income security, they're not the first to be fired. They often have a home, but they can never sell the home and realize any gain because you've got to live somewhere. If you sell one home, you've got to buy another home. You might have some investments, but they are becoming the new poor. Well, surely the wealthy are doing well. Their income is largely from asset yields, from operating businesses or investing. Their income security is high because they can't get fired. But for them, it's death by 1,000 cuts. They see their wealth as a number continue to increase. But they feel like they're getting poorer. Life continues to get harder. And that's because the rate at which they're earning money, their yield on their assets, is below the rate at which Fiatello is printing money. So they're slowly having their wealth siphoned away by the politically connected. Those that are government funded and have fully insulated income security. And perversely, their income goes up and becomes even more valuable as society continues to decline because the government needs more and more intervention. And it's really just industrialized theft at this point from everyone else in society. But now so much time has passed that the wall down the middle of the island starts to crack. And it starts to crack in such a way that both people and money can start to flow from one side to the other. So on the one side, you've got the Satoshis increasing their purchasing power at 3% a year. On the other side, you've got the Fiatellos that are losing 7% purchasing power every year. So what happens and why? What Fiatello starts to see is that money and people start to leave because they don't trust their ability to save using Fiatellos. They want Satoshis. Okay, so this sums it up. On a Fiatello standard, your money is stealing from you. Whereas on a Satoshi standard, the whole world is working 24/7 to increase your purchasing power. But now the escape valve is open. People realize they can't save in Fiatellos, so they start selling Fiatellos to buy Satoshis. So the Fiatellos decline further in value, triggering yet more budgetary and currency crises for Fiatello to deal with. And the only choice is to press the big red button again. But this time, printing money is not enough because value is leaking out of Fiatello's side of the island. He needs to change another characteristic of perfect money, which is to remove the censorship-resistant nature of it. So the Fiatello population used to be able to hold the money themselves. Now Fiatello says, no longer allowed to hold it yourselves, you have to put it in the banks. The banks are going to hold everybody's money. The population now feel that they are guilty until proven innocent for making any transaction. The banks will check every transaction to protect you. Which means when people are trying to buy certain things, including Satoshis, the banks now say no. It's because of this, it's because of that, it's because of the other. He restricts the flow of capital out of Fiatello's side of the island. He may even just create explicit capital controls. You're now no longer allowed to buy Satoshis at all. But people always find a way, and more people are waking up to what's happening, and the cycle continues. But the important thing is the wealth and the people flee to the uncorrupted money. And now Fiatello is beginning to really panic. So where does it end for Fiatello? Well, if he's lucky, with sustained inflation, allowing the government to inflate away its debts and slowly siphon away the wealth of the public. This may even border on hyperinflation. I say lucky because it's very hard to do that and maintain social cohesion, and something is likely to go wrong. It will definitely be asset seizures. Now that all the money is held in the banks, one day Fiatello will decree that we're all in it together, and the banks will hand over a proportion of that capital to the government. Just like in Cyprus in 2013, If you held over 100,000 euros in the bank overnight, 45% of that went to the government. The public was effectively bailed in to bail out the banks and the government from their own mismanagement. It also happened in the US in 1933. They made gold holdings for the individual illegal. And this lasted for almost 40 years. If you held more than $100 of gold and you were caught, $10,000 fine or 10 years in prison. And this is when $10,000 was a huge amount of money. Fiatello sees a rise in political extremism on both ends of the spectrum. The government never explains to the population where these problems are coming from. They don't tell them it's because of the money printing via the big red button. They control the media. The government is protective of itself. They don't tell the population the truth. They don't help the population join the dots. They don't explain the link from the big red button to the issues. They blame it on the greedy businessmen, or the billionaires, or that foreign dictator, or this or that. And then what happens is people ask for more help and more support from the government to deal with all of these issues, until the only solution is the government's involved in everything. So at every step of this journey, the solution to all the problems has always been more government involvement. And so the people see these problems and vote for more government involvement to solve them. Or something worse. But in all scenarios, people want to hold Satoshis and not Fiatellos. So if we go back to that list of 7 characteristics of perfect money, Fiatello only changed 2 of them. The other 5 are still exactly the same. And look where he ended up. Now, the reveal. And some of you may be slightly ahead of me here. The US dollar is just a terrible version of the Fiatello. So the US dollar is corrupted on the same 2 key issues that the Fiatellos were. But on the other 5, it's materially worse as well. In terms of portability, it's easy to carry, easy to pay, but it's not great for merchants. You pay instantly, but the merchant doesn't get the money for multiple days, and that's if there was no fraud or chargebacks. It's divisible, but only to a point, and removes the ability to do microtransactions, which will unlock potentially completely different economic models. It's durable in digital form, but we have cash component, and that cash component is constantly undermined. The notes are reprinted in terms of design every 15 or 20 years, so there's no ability for an individual to save outside the banking system. If you put notes under your bed or under the floorboards and leave them 25 years, they're worthless. Those types of notes have gone out of circulation. So you need to take the notes every 15 or 20 years to the bank, hand them in, and get new notes. They re-centralize everything periodically out of choice. They're fungible, which means every dollar is the same as every other dollar until it's not. Some countries around the world have already introduced what are known as CBDCs, which are central bank digital currency. But effectively, it's programmable money. A specific dollar may have an expiration date. You need to spend it before this period of time elapses, or else it disappears. Or a dollar may have only specific use cases. You must spend this dollar on X or Y, or you must not spend this dollar on A, B, C. The dollar is very acceptable around the world, but you can't pay for it everywhere. And typically, most national currencies are only acceptable in their own country. And the US has a major Fiatello problem. This is the budget for 2024, the budget, not the actuals, which of course were worse. But a deficit of almost 2 trillion on a spend of just over 6 trillion. That's a loss in 1 year. Now, to put that in context, they'd have double the amount of individual income taxes for everybody in the US just to balance that. And on the cost side, they can make some improvements, but there are some key things there you just cannot remove, like the debt interest. And the consequences, well, this is a chart of the amount of money in the system in dollars and the amount of debt issued by the US government over time. Now, I've labelled 1971 on here because that's when the US came unilaterally off the gold standard. Prior to 1971, You could give your dollars back and receive gold in return. Nixon took the US off the gold standard and every currency in the world followed. And since then, it's allowed the US to print unlimited amounts of money to satisfy its own needs. And the red chart on the left-hand axis shows that amount of money is now 22 trillion. And on the right-hand side, you've got the US government debt, which even a month later, this chart is now out of date. It's now 36 trillion. And this doesn't include the unfunded liabilities, the amount of money the US government has committed to pay at some point in the future through Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. But it hasn't had to write the check yet. Now, depending on how you calculate that, it's between 50 and 200 trillion on top of 36 trillion of debt. The only way to solve that is more money printing. So the money printer is systematically destroying the purchasing power of the dollar. Now, you may think I have something against the dollar. I absolutely don't. The dollar is the best that we have. I would love to be able to use the dollar, as would the vast majority of people around the world. But unfortunately, most people just aren't as lucky. This is the performance of all the other currencies versus the dollar over the last 10 years. Some have near enough disappeared completely, and some absolutely have. They've ceased to exist. The people who saved their economic energy in those currencies have seen them vanish. The unfortunate reality here, as the wonderful Lynn Alden repeatedly says, is nothing stops this train. There is no way out for governments. The only solution is to keep pressing the big red button. And so the conclusion is a quote from Hayek, who was an economist of the Austrian school, is that the history of government management of money has, except for a few short happy periods, been one of incessant fraud and deception. And he said this in 1988. Now, that would all be pretty depressing if there wasn't a solution, but thankfully there is. The only solution here is the separation of money and state. The government cannot be allowed access to a big red button. And Hayek again, and this time the quote's from 1984. I don't believe we shall ever have good money again until we take it out of the hands of government. We can't take it violently out of their hands. All we can do is, by some sly, roundabout way, introduce something they just can't stop. Brilliant quote. So I hope now, with these links between the big red button and the money printer and all of these issues that we see in our lives today, that it's now much clearer that if we can fix the money, we'll fix the world. And the good news here, and this is the best news, is that Satoshis are real. And even Fiatello is now a convert. The solution is Bitcoin. One Bitcoin is 100 million Satoshis, in the same way that $1 is 100 cents. Now, you may feel you know about Bitcoin already because of something you've been told by friends or you read in the media. I would encourage you to start the game. When we derive our information from media or people who have derived their information from the media, and that media is connected to the people who own and benefit from the money printer, it tends not to be necessarily the most accurate information. So don't trust, verify. Come to satsversusfiat.com. We've set up a website which helps people get up and running. If you're just getting started, maybe even never heard of Bitcoin before, come, sign up, and we'll send you some information so you can learn about it for yourself and make your own decisions about Bitcoin. If you're further along and maybe even call yourself a Bitcoiner already, then amazing. This is not a commercial enterprise for me. This is a charitable one. And so any support from within the Bitcoin community or further afield, I would love to receive. If people want to give this talk themselves to their friends or just share it more broadly, or even volunteer to give a presentation as part of our group, then just get in touch. And the third one is inviting us to speak. We want as many people as possible to see this presentation because the information contained within it about what the problem is so important. So we'd love to speak. If you have us at schools, universities, industry conferences, events, or even at workplaces if people are interested to learn more. So please just get in touch. Anyone. And if there's one thing that you take away from this, is I hope you will remember that if we fix the money, we'll fix the world. Thank you.
Wow. Well, that was really, it was just interesting to see it after I'd spoken to Joe this evening. What a marvellous job he has done. Now, it's getting late here at Camelot Castle, and it's time for us to say goodbye. And I will leave you with a familiar outro that I think some of you enjoy.